So let's move on now to ridiculous COVID stuff.
Okay.
So this one is just a Canada thing, and one more arrow in my quiver of I'm frustrated with some of the governmental response to this, which doesn't seem to be about health but about compliance. He has the vaccine, is in Canada.
Sorry, who is this?
Ivan, our COO, who's going to come in for business stuff. And we do need to do business stuff. We need to get together in a room for an extended period of time over multiple days to talk stuff out, figure out what's going to happen. And he was going to come down, was at the airport, and found out that he had gotten a positive test the day before, which he strongly believed was not true because he was vaccinated and all this. So he goes in, he gets the day before flying, he gets that. He goes, whatever, I'll get another one. He gets another rapid test. He's negative. It's like, great, false positive, shows up at the airport in Canada, goes to his thing. They won't let him on the plane because there is a mandated government tool that all of these clinics tap into in Canada where they say if you've got a positive thing. And he's talking to humans there being like, yes, but I have a negative one and I can go get another negative one, at whatever spot is nearby. I don't have it, I have the vaccine, I can get as many negative tests. And long story short, he now has to, according to Canada, they have apps for this, which are supposedly track you. And at one point, I don't know if they're still doing this, they would have officers check in on the location you said you were going to be. He's supposed to quarantine now for 2 weeks, even though he's since gotten another negative test. And it's just can't leave the country, can't do anything, is not allowed to go anywhere. His dad has been in this is a longer story that I won't go into, but has had to quarantine in Jamaica. He went to visit family or something, or maybe just a vacation, but is then going to have to do 2 more weeks of quarantining in Canada because it doesn't count and the plane is so dangerous and he's vaccinated. And there's, I've continued to hear these types of stories that seem so disconnected from public health. And so, I use the word literally, though it doesn't need to have the menacing, authoritarian and totalitarian in their approach. You have it, you cannot go anywhere in public. And it's frustrating, man. After
Well, the alternative is masks and vaccines forever, because what the hope was at one point was you could inconvenience people for a period of time and then stop variants from getting created and stamp out the virus. Because if you could get everybody vaccinated on the planet before there was even a Delta variant, right? If the day COVID came out, everyone got the vaccine, you wouldn't have to say the word COVID 2 years later, except for in history books. But as it spreads, variants occur, and that makes this a longer lasting problem. And so I get that it's inconvenient for us and for Ivan, but also, what is the alternative? The alternative is
to accept the negative test as a false. That's what I'm saying.
Well, how do they know that it's a false positive and not a false negative?
Because you can get multiple false negatives.
Sure, you could. I mean, ideally, you would just
at some point. You don't know, but it's
the rapid tests aren't. I mean, here, I'll devil's advocate.
Get a PCR test.
Sure, you could get the one that takes 24 hours, because the one that came up positive is the one that took. 24 hours.
Then he went back and got a PCR test.
Yeah. So that's fine. But I understand from a government's perspective, because it is unfortunately one of those situations where it's you have to inconvenience people, or you just have to be all right, COVID forever. This is going to variant forever. And then plan for that world, which is maybe masks forever, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's just people don't live past 70.
If he had coronavirus, I'd say
but how's the government going to make a policy for that?
If after your positive test you get a negative PCR test,
it can't just be one, right? Because it's got to be 6. You have to decide whatever the.
Okay, 2. I mean, I actually think 1 should be enough. If 1 positive, I don't think it's so.
Well, why do you assume that the positive is false and not the negative?
No symptoms I
Googled it, and statistically, you're more likely to get a false negative than a false positive.
Okay, well, so take 2. If I would add all of this up to say, and again, I understand that every bureaucratic entity can't have the judgment of an individual, but the totality of his situation with no symptoms, multiple false tests, 1 positive test.
Well, unfortunately, it's an asymptomatic virus, right? That's the danger of it. If it were something that never was symptomless, then not having symptoms would be a great argument.
I think
but a virus that spreads asymptomatically, it's
So there's
that's not really compelling. Like, hey, I don't have any symptoms.
I'll grant you there's a chance that he has coronavirus.
No, I'm just saying maybe the answer is he has to get 6 PCR tests. But I understand why 1 positive PCR test and 1 negative rapid test would result in not being allowed to fly.
Well, how about, yes, but we agree with then do more. You know what I mean? Like, okay, you have a higher burden of proof at this point. And we've talked about this with the NBA. Like, I know this isn't practical for most people, but the fact that these NBA players that don't want to get vaccinated can't show up and spend their own money to get expensive tests before every game to prove that they're negative. And you had the same experience of like, you had taken an antibody test because you had coronavirus. You went to New York. You're like, hey guys, guess what? We all have apparently been acknowledged that if you get the vaccine, you can still get sick. I got the antibodies,
which are supposed to be 13 times more effective.
I'm the safest person here.
Yeah.
And they're like, this isn't enough.
Yeah.
You need the vaccine. That's what I'm seeing in some of these policies is disconnection from health and a push towards compliance.
I agree. But I totally agree. I also understand why a government has to take COVID more seriously than like you, who's 34, healthy, no pre-existing conditions, and you're, I mean, mostly just looking out for like your own quality of life, whereas the government has to plan ideally for how do we set up the country for the next 100 years. And I understand the pull towards trying to stamp it out instead of letting it continue to mutate and just accepting it as a forever part of life, which by the way is like solid chance that that's where we're heading.
Yeah, it seems inevitable. I could be wrong.
It seems inevitable. It wasn't where governments were aimed, allegedly, in the beginning. Now, at some point, they might have to just accept it, that it's a
have you heard the
unstoppable
word? Have you
force.
heard the word Omicron lately? Yeah, might be hearing more of that in terms of, like, I don't know anything about it, but it's just the new big scary with regards to this.
Sure. Well, weirdly enough, I feel like you're making me seem like someone who's anxious about COVID, which I'm not. But I will say the variants do exist. Like, we laughed at, or not laughed, some people laughed at like, oh, Delta variant, like that's just a scare tactic. It's like, no, people who get vaccinated, like the whole 76ers team was vaccinated and they just got wrecked by COVID because they got a variant that the vaccine didn't stop. Like that's a thing and it's real. So there will be something after the Delta variant. Like the current vaccine we have is now
I'm not saying it's fake.
Only effective
I'm not saying it's
1 out of 3 strains.
I'm saying that I think a couple of things, I guess, are what I'm saying. That the messaging around this is always been just do one more thing. Just do one more thing. One more lockdown. Just take the vaccine. Just a few more. Just do this. And it's proving to not be.
No. I actually think we're at the point where you either have to go harder at it and inconvenience people more, or just go, this is going to be around forever.
If you went
until they have a cure, until they have a pill that everyone can just take at once.
So I guess Australia is the example of the country. I don't know a ton about it. That seems to have gone incredibly hard, like locking down their own borders. We had a friend that I won't say his name, absconded in the night across the border, like he was fleeing.
Just to go, not to leave Australia, just to go from one county to another.
I think state is what they're called. I could be wrong. That's an example of that. Now the thing is, here's the issue: they can't now relax because.
But I think their government would say they've done it great. It's a huge win.
I agree. And it's very interesting because I was talking to Ivan. I was like, how are the Canadian people handling this? And he's like, oh, they have no problem with it.
Yeah.
And there is totally, of course, every individual is different. There's like a sum total average national character that seems to determine like how people handle this. Like I talked to my buddy in Australia and he's like, no, everybody's they're a little frustrated. Like they've had lockdowns that make anything that we've seen in the US look paltry by comparison. That's been another interesting thing is to just see.
If every country in the world had acted like that, I think you might not have it.
Sure.
Omicron variant.
Totally. Well, dude, if the first country in the world had told everybody.
Well, this is the hard part. This is what I'm saying. When you stop thinking like an individual and you start thinking like a government, that's when it becomes, I think, harder to make policy because you're just going like, this has already gotten worse for our country because we didn't go hard enough at it. So do we just take the hands off the wheel and go, fuck it, COVID for everybody forever?
That's not what I'm saying. I to be clear, if you test positive, you shouldn't be able to get on an airplane. You know what I mean? Like I am down for restrictions. The things specifically that I'm not for are no, like if you think through these problems, okay, what happens if you get a positive test and then several negative tests? Like there should be back doors. There should be, and this is a small one, but like as a general philosophy, like NBA players that want to come in with negative tests should be able to.
I think the bigger problem, if your goal, let's put it this way, if your goal is to get rid of COVID forever, the bigger problem, to your point, is national identity. Because I know a lot of Americans who have forged vaccine papers or forged negative tests for stupid fucking reasons.
Do you actually know people that have done that? Or do you know that people have done that?
I have friends of friends.
Oh, really?
So I don't have any first person friends in my friend group, but friends of friends. Oh, I'm in Mexico. You know, a guy, his tenant, he owns a rental property, and his tenant was in Mexico with his girlfriend. They tested positive for COVID, and they didn't want to get a hotel for 14 days. So they just fabricated documents and got on an airplane with COVID and flew back to Seattle.
Yeah.
So I think there is the individualism, even the best policy, I think, is going to struggle with. I know another person who's, and the other thing is, I think the U.S. generally distrusts science in a way that I'm surprised by.
I'll even pause you here because I think you're making an interesting point, which is like, okay, if you isolate policies, you can be like, let's just say that you love Australia's policy and you think it's been great and you think that the benefits have absolutely outweighed the costs and, you know, whatever. And you've weighed it and you feel very confident in that. That doesn't therefore mean that policy is going to work anywhere else in the world.
I read something literally yesterday that I was just very surprised by. 30% of U.S. high school biology teachers advocate strongly for evolution. Over 50% kind of present it as an option, and 13% straight up advocate creationism. And it made me realize, wow, we are really not super scientifically persuaded in the US. Mm-hmm. So yeah, then you're going to have people like those same people who think that evolution is garbage are obviously going to think that anything you tell them about COVID is garbage. Mm-hmm. And also, we're a very selfish country. Like, we really aren't about the collective in the same way that certain Asian countries are. And so you have people who they're like, my personal view is if you're anti-vax, don't get the vaccine and then don't go to restaurants where the owner has requested that you have the vaccine. But people go a step further. They go, I'm anti-vax, but also you don't even have the right to make your own COVID decisions if they affect me. And so they'll fabricate vaccine passports so they can go to those restaurants. Mm-hmm. Sorry, which to me is a step too far, because it's like, now you're taking away that person's right to decide what they think even. But we're just such an aggressively anti-science country in some ways, and we're so individualistic that it's not a great setup for dealing with a pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess if everybody could have had that initial lockdown and obey it perfectly, that would have been really cool. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like universally around the world at the same time. We'd be done this, I guess. And this is more an emotional reaction. I'm wants more, I don't know if the word is human or a recognition that this is not the only deadly thing, and that we are not, I've said this, like the elves in Middle Earth who, if we make it through COVID, will sail off to the West and live forever. Like, I do not see a commensurate response like the one that we're having to COVID for a lot of the other things that kill people. And it feels disproportionate at this point. Some of the stuff, not all of it. Like, I'm for you can't get on an airplane with coronavirus, or even you still need to get a test and show this kind of stuff. I'm for that.
That's so. We started talking about policies. If you're a government that thinks COVID is a big deal, which we have in the U.S., but stepping back, I think it'd be great to decide where the most loss of human life occurs and then make policy accordingly. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've advocated for that on the podcast a bunch of times. I think that's great.
Hope that you guys enjoyed that clip. If you want to see more like this and have us do more podcasts, we are 100% funded by our generous patrons. And if you'd like to contribute, there's a link in the description, and we'll have one pop up on the screen right here so that we can do more podcasts where we have fun conversations and hopefully some deep ones like this. Either way, hope that you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.